Hello and welcome back to the Scottish Land and Estates podcast, ScotLand Matters, the podcast where we talk all things rural Scotland. I'm Cameron Gillies, SLE's Head of External Affairs, and today's episode is being aired to coincide with an important day in the rural calendar. The Glorious Twelfth signifies the start of the grouse shooting season, the culmination of the year-round work of land managers on Scotland's iconic moorland to create the ideal conditions for grouse, alongside a wide range of other ground-nesting birds and raptor species. Joining me today to talk about the multiple benefits Scotland's grouse shooting season brings to our rural communities is SLE's Director of Moorland, Ross Ewing, and the Regional Coordinator for the Angus Glens Moorland Group, Iona McGregor. Ross, Iona, we're delighted to have you here. Welcome to the podcast. Now, both of our guests today have an enormous wealth of knowledge and experience around moorland management and country sport. But before I start picking their brains around this, I just wanted to ask you both what the Glorious Twelfth and the opening of the grouse season means to you. Iona, can we kick off with you?
Yes, so the Glorious Twelfth is obviously a big date in the diary for those within the grouse industry, but I would say it's more than that. It's a presentation in a way to the owners of all the hard work that's gone potentially under the radar by the keepers. So it's a big thing, but also a lot of that gets missed is the estate needs to look really smart, but so does the keepers. So it's a really important day.
Yeah, it's great to see sort of communities coming together and people being able to put the finery on and kind of get out in the grouse moors. And we always love the photos that come through around this time of year, coming out of all of our rural estates. Ross, have you got any further thoughts on that? What does the 12th mean to you?
There's always a bit of apprehension, isn't there? So any kind of time from July onwards, as keepers are doing their counts, kind of hoping that sustainable surplus is there to kind of get a good few grouse days in is always an anxious time. But once you're kind of over that, I think, the focus changes, as Iona's just been saying, to the presentation, what the kind of shoot calendar is going to look like, how many days, getting all the logistics ready. I mean, the art of putting on a shoot day is something which I think is quite special, actually, in terms of pulling all those different component parts together. And especially on a driven day, if you're pulling together, potentially upwards of 60, 70 people from a local community onto a piece of arduous hill and trying to get them from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and even 6 grouse drives over the course of the day, that is a logistical spectacle that is worth seeing. So there's so much thought that goes into it. And I think at this time of year, it's just kind of making sure all the component parts are in place to have a really solid and hopefully decent grouse season.
Yeah, it's a great point, Ross, because when we think about country sport, we don't think about the sort of physical side of it. And it's hard work, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, Iona and I have gone beating in probably some of the toughest moors, I would say, that Scotland has to offer. And I mean, I don't know about you, Iona, but I mean, I think when I think of the Glorious 12, I think, I'm going to be sweating a lot on that day, probably by virtue of going beating. So I don't know about you.
I know, let alone whether it's going to be sunny or not, but yeah, exactly. Got to get to the top of the hills.
I know. We should really have pulled together like a starter pack for people that are going to be going out for it, which includes things like plenty of deodorant, obviously, but mainly blister plasters. You want to have some really, really good walking boots to get you up and down that hill. And if there's such a thing as possible as breathable tweed, that's what we need. But there we are. That's what I would say we need as a starter for 10.
Absolutely, and maybe like a 12-week training program in the run-up as well. Not just for the beaters, but for the dogs as well.
Correct, absolutely right. The dogs have a great time, and for the dogs, I think. I mean, Iona, you know more about this than I do, but I think from just ahead of the 12th of August, the start of basically 6 months work for working dogs, always a really exciting time in the calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about things getting maybe a bit tough, in recent years, there's been a lot of changes around the policy landscape underpinning the operation of grouse moors. How do you think this is affecting the sector? And do you think this year we're going to see any sort of differences compared to previous years?
It's a really good question. I mean, this is year 2 of licensing of grouse shooting in place. Have to say, by and large, that's been a pretty painless process for folk. You apply for your license, you get your license. No one's lost any licenses, so that's all good news so far. So I think as far as that perspective goes, Cameron, it's been pretty plain sailing. Obviously, there's other aspects of grouse moor management that's becoming licensed, Muirburn being the obvious one, with the regulations set to come in on the 1st of January. That's going to pose a challenge, undoubtedly, for people, but I think, they've got a little bit more of time to prepare now for it. Ministers have moved back on the implementation date, so hopefully that will help. But I think, we're dealing with a sector that is inherently resilient and inherently forward-thinking when it comes to these sort of challenges, and I think that's sort of borne out by the way that we've approached regulation kind of over the past 4, 5, 6 years when we've had licensing on the cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And Iona, from your perspective on the ground, are keepers talking about this a lot? Is it something that they're worried about, or is it something that they're just embracing and kind of cracking on with?
I think it's important to remember that every industry and jobs within those industries will have protocol in place, and over the years they do change. So the grouse industry being one of them, but I think their concern is potentially that the people that are able to make these decisions haven't had the experience of being out on the hills. They haven't seen the full impact or the full impact of their decision. So that's their concern going off what they've said. But as long as the people making the decisions are actually willing to go out and learn firsthand of what actually gets done and how these traditional practices are put in place, then they are quite understanding to it.
Yeah, and have you seen a lot of that recently, Ross? I know you've had the minister out on a grouse moor quite recently. Obviously, seeing some of the damage to moorland up north in Speyside and Murray after wildfires. Are you seeing a greater level of engagement from politicians on this issue of grouse shooting, or is that going the wrong direction, perhaps?
No, I think among most of the political parties, there is a keenness to understand kind of what makes rural communities tick. And in large parts of Scotland, grouse moors are pretty integral to the sustainability of rural communities. So I think there is a desire to understand that. We've had a lot of ministerial engagement, a lot of MSP engagement over the last 4 or 5 years, which has been really positive. And of course, the regional moorland groups play, I think, such an important role in this because they have these connections with their local politicians in the way that SLE as a national organisation perhaps doesn't have, certainly not at that level anyway. So it's really good to kind of see the regional moorland groups kind of taking ownership of the kind of the fact that they have politicians there to represent their areas and making sure those people are cited and understand the issues at play. So I think overall the political engagement that we're getting at this point in time is good, and I think what we need now is just politicians to kind of bluntly leave the sector alone for a little while and just say, we've got these regulations now in force. They will do their job, and I think what we need now is focus on the multiple benefits that are derived from grouse moor management and grouse shooting overall.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into some of those benefits, Russ. I know it's clear to us that the sector, who are in the sector at the moment, that country sports got a huge economic upside. And there's plenty of evidence supporting this as well, stuff that SLE has produced, but also the government's own statistics suggest that there is this big economic upside. How far do these benefits extend into our rural communities, and how can we communicate those benefits more effectively to politicians to demonstrate what these benefits are?
There's a big question. I think, Iona, you'll have your own views on this as well, but I mean, from my perspective, there's so many businesses that are in some way connected or touched by grouse shooting, and sometimes perhaps they don't necessarily know it. So although estates have a very front and center grouse offering, sometimes they'll be utilizing the services of, let's say, garages or joiners kind of throughout the course of any given year. And obviously that is in part and parcel because of the land management activities that are taking place on these estates, whether it's grouse shooting, deer stalking, other types of shooting, natural capital, whatever. But I suppose the point is that these businesses, these estates, are responsible for generating a huge amount of business for kind of these smaller rural businesses. And for me, that's the real success story. We've got some Scottish Government research which came out a few years ago, which kind of talked about the levels of local and regional spending that kind of grouse shooting estates deliver. And it was found that those that are doing driven grouse shooting in particular tend to generate generate the highest levels of local and regional spending in their local communities. And I think that is so important because, we think of businesses as kind of independent entities. A lot of these kind of independent entities in rural communities are sustained in part by rural estates, and I don't think we should for 1 second shy away from how important that contribution is. But Iona, you've worked on these estates. I don't know, what do you think in terms of kind of that driving economic benefit for local communities? What do you think?
So for the Glorious 12th, we've got 12 glorious jobs following the Glorious 12th coming up on social media. And when I was doing some research, like Ross said, the list is really endless. Even when you take a step back and look at the wider picture, I would say it's like a full circle. So the local kids, the families that get supported through these estates, as well as the local villagers, they go beating, and then they put their wage back into the local shops, as well as the guns coming from far and wide that are bringing money in while they stay, and they're spending that within the area. So it really is huge. And like Ross said, I don't think some of the businesses really do realise until they get asked the question, like I've been asking, how do you think the industry supports you? They really do take a moment to think that through and realise like the full effect.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, what's this big buzzword, Cameron? Circular economy. That's the word that is kind of constantly batted around. I was
just going to bring that up. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I just think that nothing embodies it more than kind of, if you do manage to get those times when you've got a shootable surplus of grouse, you've got kind of half the local village out on this piece of moorland, as I say, getting their daily wage and then going back and spending on something nice in their locality. It is the definition of sustainable, and that circular economy piece that we know Scottish ministers are so keen on. So I think it's really important to flag that, but also, and the other thing that I never want to shy away from when it comes to this, irrespective of whether there is a surplus of grouse or not, these businesses are investing routinely, monthly, weekly, sometimes daily in local businesses. So irrespective of whether you get that kind of boost from having a sustainable surplus of grouse, which of course brings the kind of various tourism benefits, you have got this kind of, almost drumbeat of investment that's going out of estates and into the local community to maintain things like vehicles, maintain all the various kind of buildings and structures on estates and so on and so forth. So it's a huge operation, and I think it's just really important that we lay it bare that these estates are absolutely central for this economic sustainability of rural communities.
Yeah, and it's great that we can talk about these economic upsides as a given, because we know that it's not just the estates that benefit from them; it is those wider communities. It's really good that we can have that conversation. But I think you're right to also touch on the fact that it extends so much beyond that, because we've been having a national conversation about food security, and the implications of grouse shooting for that can clearly be quite positive. And there's also that idea of social cohesion that rural communities in many remote areas do actually rely on this, and it's an opportunity for them to come together. I wonder, Iona, is that something that you see in Angus particularly, where you have communities that exist up Glens, and this is that time of year where they all come together, they're all out on the hill, they can all share a drink and a story at the end of the day. Is that something that you really see on the ground?
For sure, definitely. I think also when you go to a shoot and somebody's brought their elderly father out or something, and it's really, really sweet to see them sit there and enjoy their day. They're outside seeing people they've not seen in years, but also they're able to tell the stories of back in the day. And then for them to look and see all the youngsters that are coming up the ranks as well. So not only is it sociable, but it really does have that strong community feel. You see people you've not seen in years. You're able to share tips and knowledge, or dog tips and knowledge, and bits and bobs of advice to each other. So it is also really sociable. It's community feel, which is nice. It's really nice feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea of the sort of contribution to the food supply chain as well, I think is an interesting one, particularly around some of the rhetoric coming out of the UK government around the fact that food security is national security. Clearly there's an opportunity here, not to contribute absolute masses of food to the supply chain, but certainly at a local level, when we're talking about supplying on a local scale. We have the Good Food Nation in Scotland, which talks about shortening supply chains. Clearly in rural areas, there's an opportunity here to get local food produced on our glens into sort of school dinners, into hospital food, and also supporting local food banks. I know that there's some great schemes on the go. How do you see that filtering through? Is that something that you're hoping to see some strides taken on during this season?
Definitely. So Strathmore Rugby Club's a perfect example. So we've got the game for game. So each of their hospitality games, we are able to provide pheasant, potentially venison this season as well. So the feedback they have from last year is absolutely fantastic. But I think once people realise that, that deer, for example, has been running wild and free on that hill, and now it's on the plate, the lack of food miles, it's also really, really nutritional. But I know myself, during the pheasant season, I don't buy any chicken, not a single chicken. I just eat pheasant, and then I freeze that for the following month. So it's also it's just really good for you, to be honest, and it's right on the doorstep. I'd rather have that than something that's been brought up in an unhealthy or stressed environment.
100%. I can't think of a shorter food supply chain than off the hill and onto the grill. And that's a new one on me this year. We talk about gate to plate and farm to fork, but hill to grill now seems to be...
Hill to grill. Yeah. I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to claim this one for the regional Moorland Groups, but I'm fairly sure that Loch Ness Rural Communities were the first kind of group, if you like, to kind of coin that phrase. But I'm sure I'll be corrected if that's not the case. But certainly they've been running a very successful Hill to Grill program for a number of years, which other Moorland Groups have taken on as well, taking that into schools, and it's been really, really good. So, yeah, really good initiative.
It's a really positive message as well. I think when we look at food security as a whole, we really want this to be part of the conversation. And the more we can shout about schemes like Hill to Grow, the better. The next question I had kind of goes off in a slightly different direction. There's a very vocal opposition to grouse shooting in Scotland, and it's driven by a notion that moorland managed for these purposes causes ecological harm. And what would you say to those who argue that grouse shooting is bad for the environment? Ross, we'll start with you.
Oh gosh, what would I say to them? Look, I mean, I do think part of this stems from a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness about the kind of multiple ecological benefits that grouse management delivers. And I think it's a really complex issue because inherently some people are opposed to the notion that one species should be killed in order to benefit another. And of course, predator control is one of those kind of central planks of grouse management. But when you see what that kind of predator control delivers in terms of biodiversity benefit, whether it's waders, whether it's raptors, whether it's other kind of types of moorland wildlife, I really think it kind of puts any of those kind of concerns to rest. And the reason I say that is because, predator control is something that's practiced on grouse moors all year round, broadly by and large. It's always something that gamekeepers are hot on to. They're targeting species which are really supernumerous across the United Kingdom and even beyond, and they're managing these species in a humane way so that other species can benefit. And I think we do need to recognise that in Scotland we live in a ecosystem which is not like completely balanced. We don't have these kind of predators that are going to be able to prey on species like the fox, for example. So there is always going to be an amount of kind of management that needs to take place by us. And what you see on managed moorland is that those practices obviously are delivering benefits for kind of other wildlife that's really struggling. And I think we really need to be upfront about the fact that some of our most treasured wildlife, some of our wildlife that is in decline nationally, is doing well on managed moorland for grouse shooting, and that is a fact. That has been proven time after time in pieces of peer-reviewed scientific literature. So I understand the hostility, and I understand why people on principle don't agree with killing predators. I absolutely understand that point. But when you see what it delivers in terms of biodiversity benefit, when you see the kind of humane way that it's practiced using the very best pieces of equipment and kit, you've really got to understand that this is really important for combating biodiversity loss in Scotland. And ultimately, I think it's going to have an enduring role for years to come.
Yeah, I often think it's really difficult to make the case that what benefits one ground nesting bird, that is grouse, won't also benefit the lapwing or the curlew or the woodcock, whatever it happens to be. It's a really difficult argument to make. So And that's a positive message to send as well. Iona, do you have any reflections on that? What would be your message to the sort of vocal minority of people who do think that grouse moor management is damaging our natural environment?
I fully agree with what Ross said for sure. What I would say though is social media is such a big drive nowadays. What people read and see, they instantly believe. So maybe take a step back, read some of the comments, take it with a pinch of salt, but go out on the hills and speak to the gamekeepers and the people who are carrying out these traditional practices firsthand and learn and then make your own opinion. I think people are so easy nowadays to tag on to what other people around them think and say. But one of my good friends, she's vegan and that's her views and that's totally fine. You know, it's one of these things, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but go out and learn firsthand and then make your own decision rather than jumping on the bandwagon as such.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Just to have this conversation in a sort of adult way. You know, we don't
Yeah,
need to be arguing about it. We don't need to be demonstrating about it. Let's just have a conversation, and let's get people out on grouse moors so they can see
exactly.
firsthand the good work that gamekeepers are doing for all biodiversity, not just for healthy grouse counts. You know, at the end of the day, what's good for the goose is always good for the gander. And I know that's a message we'll continue to put forward. I have one kind of final question on this, and it kind of goes along the same theme because we're often told that shooting is a sport for the wealthy elite. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about how we change this narrative and encourage more people to get involved in what we've already discussed is great for social cohesion. It's great for economic benefits for local communities. It's good for your physical fitness as well, as Ross was saying at the start. And so, what more can we do to get people involved in this?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, what I would say, I think, first and foremost, is that there are, I think, a lot of people that are not necessarily kind of the kind of stereotypical wealthy aristocrats that are undertaking that do shoot in Scotland. You know, I think we need to acknowledge that there are plenty of kind of shoots where, you know, irrespective of kind of what background you come from, whatever, you're super welcome. And I'd actually say the majority of shoots are probably in that category. But it is, of course, an expensive sport. You know, and we can't shy away from that. If you're paying to go shooting, you're going to be paying a fair amount of money to do it. And I understand that for some people that is out of reach. So how do you actually get involved in this activity? Well, you know, we've kind of mentioned it there. The shooting bit is kind of one part of the equation. You know, actually a lot of people get more enjoyment out of being part of kind of the wider kind of arrangement that makes a shoot day happen. So whether that's beating, whether that's picking up, the amount of dog people that are obviously involved in the shooting world, but perhaps without necessarily picking up an actual shotgun, is unreal. But you know, these people are absolute professionals when it comes to utilizing dogs for kind of country sports. So I think it really depends on what you want to get out of it. But what I would say is that there are a number of if shooting is your thing, there's a number of ways into it. You know, there's everything from kind of walked up, low key kind of DIY type shoots, which are run really informally, kind of without kind of any full-time gamekeeper, all the way up to those kind of more professionally managed shoots where you can be a member of a syndicate and you know, enjoy several days in the season, which are really fulfilling. So it really depends. I think there's lots of opportunities though, and I think what's really important is the initiatives that the regional Moorland groups run in particular to get more children out onto managed moorland is really, really important part of kind of opening people's eyes up to the possibilities. And I'm talking about that from a purely kind of hobby perspective, be that shooting, but also from a careers perspective as well. Iona talked about the 12 glorious jobs. I think it's really important that we kind of make sure young people are aware of all these amazing employment opportunities as well that are available in the countryside, because you know there's no better office, I would argue, than you know somewhere in the Angus Glens or up in Speyside in Perthshire, down in the Southern Uplands or wherever. You know, these are really amazing places to live and work.
Yeah, I wonder if you could give us a bit more insight into those schemes that the Moorland groups are running around education and around getting people involved. It sounds really fascinating.
Yes, so having spoken to the Angus keepers on multiple occasions, they are all for getting kids and also adults out and about and educating them so that they can see the work firsthand. So we've got Hill to Grill events planned in the coming months. The keepers are yet to know about that, but that'll get told soon. We've also got a couple of smaller schools, so instead of them having to do all the extra things like sort of minibus, I was like, you know what, why don't I just come to you with a couple of keepers and we can do something personalised to you guys. So it's about getting the balance that works for the schools as well. We've got Learn and Land that will be starting next year. So there's lots of different aspects to it, and I think it is like what Ross said, just opening the door and showcasing to these kids, look, this is what happens on the hills. When you next go for a hill walk, look around you a bit more and see what you notice. So rural skills as well. We did some rural skills events and the teachers been in touch, so get some of those pupils out. So they are really keen, the keepers and the kids, and I think it's getting a good balance and showcasing what jobs and opportunities are actually out there that maybe don't get the best promotion by others.
Yes, it's a really important conversation to have, particularly on that jobs piece in the context of, early August, people getting their exam results. There's opportunities in the rural sector, and it's really good that the Moorland Groups are kind of shouting for the rooftops about the opportunities that are there for people. Ross, Iona, it's been a really interesting conversation. Thanks so much for giving up your time to speak to us about the multiple benefits of the grouse seasoning in Scotland, all the opportunities that are there for people to get involved, and maybe some of the rebuttals that people can use when people do ask questions about the ecological implications of grouse shooting. It's been a great conversation, so thank you very much for joining us, and happy 12th. Have a good one.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you all for listening to today's edition of the ScotLand Matters podcast. You can listen to all episodes on our website or your preferred podcast platform. And finally, the Helping It Happen Awards are back again with over 100 nominations across 11 different categories. We're delighted to be returning to the Sheraton in Edinburgh to celebrate rural success at this year's awards dinner. To book your tickets, head over to our website and click on the events tab.